The footage wasn't supposed to go viral. It was just a grainy clip from a corner security camera inside a modest homeless shelter on the edge of downtown Los Angeles. The timestamp showed 8:47 p.m. The man who walked in wore a hoodie pulled low, sunglasses even though it was night, and carried a plain brown paper bag. No entourage, no flashing cameras, no security. Just Justin Bieber, alone. The volunteers barely looked up at first, assuming he was someone dropping off leftovers. But then one of them paused, stared, and whispered, "Wait, is that?" It was. He didn't say much, just nodded, placed the bag on the table, and quietly started unpacking containers of hot food, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, bottles of water. He asked if it was okay to help. Nobody expected it. "We didn't even recognize him at first," one of the workers said later. "He just blended in like he'd done this before." But the shelter didn't post about it. No press release, no tweets. If it hadn't been for that camera footage leaking 2 days later, no one outside those walls would have even known. And yet, what followed wasn't just about kindness. It wasn't a celebrity doing good to repair an image. It wasn't a photo op. What happened inside that shelter exposed something bigger, something uncomfortable, something that forced everyone, fans, critics, even Justin himself, to look deeper. Because sometimes, when you strip away fame, the only thing left is whether you see someone as human or not. Years ago, the idea of Justin Bieber quietly walking into a homeless shelter would have sounded like a headline from a satirical tabloid. This was the same kid who once egged his neighbor's house, got arrested for drag racing a Lamborghini, and stormed off live interviews when questions got too personal. For a while, the public image was clear, talented, yes, but also impulsive, entitled, and out of control. Even his fans, the ones who'd grown up with him, began to ask if fame had swallowed him whole. But time has a way of reshaping people, especially when they fall hard enough to realize what really matters. In the last few years, there were signs. Not loud declarations, not viral PR stunts, but quiet shifts. A candid Instagram post about his struggle with anxiety. A raw interview where he admitted, "I was using people, using substances, and I felt empty." He started appearing at church again, not for the paparazzi, but because he said it helped him feel grounded. One name kept coming up in those quiet changes: Pastor Josh Keller, a local figure in LA known for his grassroots work with at-risk communities. Bieber and Keller met during a late-night worship session in 2020, but it wasn't music that bonded them. It was a shared frustration with the way people were treated based on how they looked or where they lived. Keller had grown up in the system. He knew what it was like to be overlooked. And Bieber, despite all his privilege, had also felt like a product more than a person. The two started volunteering together, often at night, away from cameras. They handed out care packages, delivered meals, and just listened to people, especially the ones most ignored. So when Justin walked into that shelter with a paper bag and no announcement, it wasn't out of character anymore. It was a continuation of a transformation that had been happening in the shadows. Not everyone saw it coming, but those who had been paying attention, they weren't surprised. They just knew that Justin was no longer trying to be seen, he was trying to see. The folding chairs were lined up in crooked rows, half filled with people clutching plastic trays, heads down, minds elsewhere. In the far corner, sitting alone near the coffee urn, was Ray. His beard was speckled with gray, his coat too big for his wiry frame, and his fingers, long, elegant, calloused, tapped out a soft rhythm on the table. You wouldn't know it by looking, but Ray used to be someone, a jazz drummer with credits on albums most people in that room would never hear. He'd once played backup for legends in smoky clubs and echoing halls. Now he played to no one, on surfaces that didn't sing back. Justin noticed the rhythm first. Maybe it was the musician in him, but he walked straight toward Ray and asked, "That a swing beat?" Ray looked up, surprised, maybe even suspicious. But when he nodded, Justin pulled out the chair beside him like they were old bandmates catching up. They started talking music, Miles Davis, Coltrane, Herbie Hancock. Ray's voice grew stronger with each name, like muscle memory filling in lost time, but it didn't take long before the notes turned heavy. Ray spoke in slow, deliberate words, his gaze drifting toward the floor. Lost my job after the venue shut down. Pandemic didn't help. Then came the eviction. He paused. You ever feel like people don't see you unless they're scared of you? Justin didn't answer. He just listened. Ray went on. He talked about walking into stores and getting followed, about being stopped outside of buildings he used to play in, now mistaken for a trespasser, about trying to apply for jobs and getting ghosted the moment they asked for his ID. You tell someone you've been homeless for a year, and suddenly you're not a person anymore, you're a problem. He didn't cry, but his voice cracked just once when he mentioned his daughter, said he hadn't spoken to her in 3 years, said he used to sing her to sleep with a soft shuffle beat on his thighs, said now he doesn't even know where she lives. Justin stared at him, eyes wide but quiet, hands folded, not pity, not shock, just the heavy recognition of a reality he'd never lived, but one he couldn't ignore. In that moment, there was no celebrity and no homeless man. Just two musicians, one world famous, the other forgotten, linked by rhythms and silences that said more than words ever could. The usual rhythm of the shelter shifted that night. People weren't rushing through their meals or keeping to themselves. Conversations sparked, laughter bubbled in corners where silence usually lived. And at the center of it was Justin, still in that same hoodie, sleeves rolled up, scooping mashed potatoes beside a volunteer who had no idea she was working next to a Grammy winner. He didn't act like a guest, he acted like staff. When a tray fell, he picked it up. When a kid cried out from a cold draft, he fetched a blanket. He stayed. Not for 5 minutes, not for a photo, but for hours. He made his rounds table by table, not shaking hands or posing, but sitting down, asking names, listening to stories. Some were funny, some heartbreaking, all of them real. When one man broke into song between bites of cornbread, Justin joined in, harmonizing so naturally it felt like they'd rehearsed. It wasn't a spectacle, it was human. Later that night, after most people had left and the staff began cleaning up, Justin was still there, drying dishes beside the same volunteer who now whispered, "I can't believe this is real." He looked over at Ray, who was still sitting where they'd first met, holding that same coffee cup, still tapping a rhythm, only this time just a little louder. Justin walked over, carrying something under his arm, a neatly folded set of clothes, a black jacket, jeans, and a crisp pair of sneakers. "Thought you could use these," he said, placing them gently in front of Ray. Ray blinked, his fingers pausing mid-beat. "I don't need charity," he murmured. Justin shook his head. "This isn't charity, this is respect." Then came the moment that froze the air. Justin leaned in and said, "I've got a session this weekend, downtown. You should come. Bring your rhythm. I've got a track that needs something raw." Ray didn't respond right away. His eyes welled, not with emotion he couldn't feel, but with disbelief that someone still saw his gift. Across the room, a security guard, finally catching up to what was happening, stepped forward. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. Justin turned, his face calm, voice low and steady. "If not me, who?" He wasn't asking for permission, he was stating a truth. In a world quick to scroll past pain and faster to judge the broken, someone with a platform had decided to slow down and look closer, not because he had to, but because he could. The video surfaced 3 days later. Someone at the shelter had taken a discreet clip. Just a few seconds of Justin handing Ray the clothes and sitting beside him. It wasn't polished, no fancy transitions, just raw, unfiltered humanity. But that was enough? Within hours, it was everywhere. Headlines flooded social media. Justin Bieber spotted at homeless shelter. Bieber's surprise visit sparks tears and hope. From pop star to people's hero? Some called it inspiring, others weren't so kind. Cable pundits dissected it like it was strategy. Another calculated PR move, one anchor sneered. Interesting timing, considering his tour just got announced. A viral tweet asked, would this story be so heartwarming if he sat with a white man instead? Comments piled up, ranging from praise to venom. But when a second video leaked, this time a short clip from inside the studio, where Ray could be seen laughing and tapping a beat with a pair of borrowed sticks, the tone shifted darker. Who is this guy? Trolls barked. Why is Bieber promoting him? Racial slurs started creeping into comment threads. Some users suggested Ray was an actor, others joked cruelly about Bieber's new charity case. The ugliness wasn't subtle. It never is when it comes dressed in digital anonymity. Ray, who had kept to himself since the story broke, agreed to speak to one journalist. He met her in a coffee shop a few blocks from the shelter, wearing the same jacket Justin had given him. When she asked how he felt about all the attention, he just smiled faintly and said, "It's not about attention. He didn't see a statistic. He saw a man." That line hit like a quiet storm. And yet, the irony lingered. The same country that celebrated a pop star's kindness couldn't resist tearing down the man who received it. Ray became a symbol without his permission, held up, debated, doubted. Not because of what he did, but because of what he looked like. It wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. Because even acts of compassion in America can't escape the lens of race. Even generosity is filtered through suspicion when the recipient is black and poor. And no matter how genuine the gesture, there will always be those who choose to see threat instead of need, who read agenda where there is only decency. The shelter staff stopped reading the comments after the first day. Justin didn't say much either. But in private, he reportedly told Pastor Keller, "I didn't do it to go viral. I did it because he mattered." That was the part the internet couldn't twist. Because somewhere beneath the noise, one simple truth still echoed: kindness should never have to prove itself. The headlines faded after a week. The hashtags cooled. New controversies replaced the old, and the algorithm moved on. But what happened inside that shelter, what happened between two men who sat down and simply saw each other, didn't disappear. Because the story was never really about Justin. It wasn't about a pop star doing the right thing, or even a kind gesture gone viral. The truth is, this story was always about something bigger, something harder to face. Visibility. In the United States, nearly 40% of the homeless population is black, despite black Americans making up just over 13% of the total population. That's not a coincidence. That's a symptom. Decades of systemic racism in housing policy, banking, employment, and policing have created an environment where falling through the cracks isn't an accident. It's designed. Black families are more likely to be denied loans. Black men are more likely to be stopped, searched, and incarcerated. And once you're out of the system, once you've lost the job, the home, the ID, it becomes nearly impossible to climb back without help. Shelters, too, are not immune to bias. Stories of discrimination inside these supposed safe havens are common. People turned away for how they look, how they speak, who they are. And when it comes to employment? Try walking into an interview with no fixed address and a history of arrests that stemmed not from guilt, but from being born in the wrong zip code. People like Ray don't end up on the streets because they made one mistake. They end up there because society made 1,000 decisions that pushed them further and further away from the center. Justin gave Ray clothes and an invitation, but what mattered more was that he gave him dignity. He looked him in the eyes. He listened without flinching. That kind of visibility is rare, not because people like Ray are rare, but because the world has trained itself to look past them. We cross the street. We lower our gaze. We assume. We judge. We justify. It's easier to throw $1 into a cup than it is to ask someone their name. "It's easy to feed a man for a day," Pastor Keller once said. "Harder to fight what made him hungry." That fight isn't glamorous, it doesn't trend, but it's where change actually lives, and maybe that's the point. Not to wait for a celebrity to remind us that people matter, but to start seeing them on our own. To recognize that someone's value isn't determined by their address, their past, or the color of their skin. It's determined by our willingness to look and to care. Ray moved into transitional housing 3 weeks after the shelter visit. It wasn't much, just a room with a bed, a desk, and a window that caught the morning sun, but to him, it felt like a fresh breath after years underwater. The shelter staff helped him get his ID replaced. A local nonprofit, nudged by Justin's quiet donation, arranged counseling sessions and employment support. And when asked what he needed most, Ray didn't hesitate. Drumsticks, just a pair. He got them. Along with a used practice pad and a pass to a community music studio downtown. At first, he'd just sit there, tapping out rhythms alone, warming his hands to the sound of something he thought he'd lost forever. Then came a phone call from an unknown number. It was Bieber's team inviting him to a private charity event. "Bring your groove," the voice said. "We've got something special planned." On the night of the event, the room was dimly lit, intimate, filled with people in sleek suits and designer shoes, sipping wine and nodding politely. No one expected anything unusual. Until the lights shifted and a lone spotlight landed on a drum kit at center stage. And there he was, Ray, dressed in a clean black shirt, eyes scanning the crowd with the calm of someone who'd lived more than he'd ever say out loud. He didn't speak. He just played. A soft shuffle, then a slow build, then a thunder of rhythm so full and raw it cut through the room like truth. The crowd quieted, heads turned, cameras dropped. When the last beat faded, Justin stepped out beside him and clapped, not as a host, but as a student. Later that night, when asked how it felt, Ray smiled, shrugged, and said, "I thought I was forgotten. Turns out I was just unseen." And for the first time in years, he wasn't looking down. He was looking ahead. Months passed. The headlines disappeared, the clicks moved on, but Justin didn't. He came back to the shelter, quietly, without cameras or team, just like before. No one announced his arrival, but those who remembered him smiled when he stepped through the doors again, this time carrying bags of groceries and a donation envelope tucked into his back pocket. The building hadn't changed much. The tables were still worn, the coffee still lukewarm, the people still shifting in and out like ghosts. But something on the far wall had changed. A framed photograph hung just above the meal line. It was a candid shot, Justin and Ray sitting side by side, laughing, caught mid-conversation. The kind of image that didn't need a filter to feel alive. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "We all matter, equally." Justin stood in front of it for a long moment, saying nothing, just reading the words, then glancing around the room like he was looking for someone. But Ray wasn't there. He'd moved on. He was recording, teaching, rebuilding. The shelter had served its purpose for both of them. And maybe that's where this story really ends, not with applause or interviews or another viral moment, but with someone returning, not because the world asked, but because his heart did, because he remembered, because he saw, not because he's a star, but because he stopped to listen. And now, it's your turn. When was the last time you really saw someone? Not their job, not their clothes, not the labels, but them. We scroll past faces every day, convinced they're just part of the background. But sometimes a second look can be the beginning of someone's turning point. If Ray's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Support organizations that fight homelessness and racial injustice, like the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the Equal Justice Initiative, or Campaign Zero. They're doing the work, brick by brick, to make sure people like Ray don't fall through the cracks again. And if nothing else, share this story, not for views, not for likes, but because someone out there might need to hear it. someone who's felt unseen, someone who's still waiting to be heard, like share, subscribe. Because sometimes telling one story can change another.